Open Line.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Open Line. I'm Carrie Sharp. I'm glad to be back with you after a couple of weeks off from the show. Tonight, we are talking about term limits. When it comes to our lawmakers, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Give us a call. The number, as always, is on the screen, 615-737-PLUS. We will get those calls lined up, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. But first, let me introduce you to our guest. His name is Dukette. He is the Tennessee State Director for U.S. Term Limits. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Carrie. How are you tonight?
You know, I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Good.
Good.
I'm great, and I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, tell us about U.S. Term Limits. I didn't know this was an organization.
Sure. We've actually been around for quite some time. The U.S. Term Limits was established in 1992, and you'll remember back in the 90s, the mid 90s, there was a big push and a lot of discussion about term limits. And U.S. Term Limits at its inception worked to get a lot of ballot initiatives in the states going so that the voters in the state legislatures would pass laws, not only passing state level term limits, but also legislation that would term limit a state's own delegation to Congress. So the states would all have representation at all times, but they had varying term limits depending on what that state decided. So actually about 23 states, actually 23 states passed some form of legislation like this to term limit their own delegations to Congress, which is a substantial movement in just about 3 years. But what happened was that in 1995, there was someone that wasn't very happy with this law. There's an Arkansas law like this, and it was challenged all the way to the Supreme Court. And in a Supreme Court case that we were a party to, U.S. Term Limits versus Thornton, in a 5-4 split decision, it was ruled that all those laws in the 23 states which put term limits on their own delegations to Congress were unconstitutional. And they ruled that only a constitutional amendment, which applies across the board to any state and any representation in any state, could put term limits on Congress.
So how do we get a constitutional amendment if that's what the majority of voters want, are term limits?
Yeah, so we're bound to follow what the Supreme Court has told us, right? So we have to get a constitutional amendment. And the Constitution tells us how we can get constitutional amendments. In Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, it's outlined two ways for proposing amendments and two ways for ratifying amendments. The way that we're all pretty familiar with from grade school and civics classes, right, is we're familiar with Congress, passes an amendment proposal through 2/3 supermajorities of both chambers of Congress, and then whatever survives that is sent to the state legislatures for ratification, and then 38 states are needed to ratify any amendment that's proposed before it can become part of the Constitution and the law of the land. But what had been less known until recent times is actually, if you look at the other half of Article 5, Article 5 is pretty short. It's a single sentence, kind of a longer sentence, but it actually provides another means to propose an amendment, and especially for a situation like this with term limits on Congress. What it provides for is that when 2/3 of the state legislatures, so today that's 34 of the 50 states, pass a resolution, what's called applying to Congress for a convention for proposing an amendment, then all 50 states can come together for sort of the one and sole purpose of proposing an amendment according to that which they applied for. So our organization supports legislation in the state legislatures that when 34 of the states have passed the resolution, then all 50 states can come together to propose a congressional term limits amendment proposal. And just like Congress can anytime they can propose amendments, which then get sent to the states to be ratified, so the states can actually come together pursuing this to draft that amendment and then send it back to their own state legislatures to be ratified and become part of the law.
That is a great explanation to kind of help us jump into this conversation. It is also a lot to digest. So let's get to the phone lines really quickly, and then we will jump in and dig a little bit more. Lucy is on the line. Good evening, Lucy. Thank you for getting us started.
Hey, y'all.
Hi, go ahead.
Well, I've got a couple of questions. The first question is, I've got three.
The first question is, how many years did Strom Thurmond and trying to think of the other guy, Strom Thurmond and I can't even think of his name. I had a senior moment. Who are the two longest serving congressmen? I think one served till he was 99 years of age. Do you know?
Aaron is shaking his head. I think he knows the area you're going down.
Okay.
I know
and,
roughly.
Let's see. My next question, are you a constitutionalist?
Okay.
Do you have a third question? Go ahead and ask your third,
okay.
and then we'll answer.
I didn't get his response.
Well, we'll do it all together. So go ahead and ask your third question.
And my last question is, are you a libertarian organization? And I'll hang up and take your response offline.
Okay. Thanks, Lucy. Good to hear from you tonight. Go ahead, Aaron.
So those are really good questions. So I'll start with the third one. We are a nonpartisan organization, and thoroughly so. We have on our team at U.S. Term Limits people from all political persuasions. We do have libertarians, but we have Republicans, Democrats, Independents. It's really all over the map, and that's what's unique about this issue. Is it's a uniquely nonpartisan issue. If you look at the polling, it bears out. Actually, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent. It's through the roof, the approval of term limits on Congress. And so my answer is, we're dealing with a nonpartisan issue, and really it's sort of a beyond ideology. This solution. It's kind of a more of sort of middle of the road kind of common sense reform. As to am I a constitutionalist? Heck yeah, I am, because we're trying to use the Constitution in order to rectify what we see here, some of the problems in Congress. So absolutely, we stand by the Constitution, and that's why we want to use that Constitution to the advantage of the country. We see the incredible. Just turn on your news out of Congress any given day. It's infuriating, and it doesn't matter what party you're in. People are pretty fed up with what they've been seeing for decades now, and Congress is kicking the ball down the road, again and again on very difficult issues, and it's just refusing to address those. Mm-hmm. And as far as Strom Thurmond, I don't know the exact amount of time. I know it was over 40 years, if not pushing 50. And there's been several other examples of that, throughout Congress, and actually that are still in Congress today. Mm-hmm. You have Mitch McConnell, that's been in there since 1985. Patrick Leahy's been in since 1974. You name it, there's a whole list. I think that should answer your question.
Yeah, let's back up just a little bit, because I want to bring everyone up to speed that there are no term limits on our U.S. representatives and senators. They serve terms, right, but they can keep running.
That's right, and like we have term limits on the presidency, right? What happened is George Washington sort of set a precedent by stepping down and not running for a third term, and that was really well regarded and respected for well over 100 years in our nation's history. And so that was sort of the Washingtonian example that presidents would follow, that we would not essentially have an elective king here in the United States. And so he stepped down so that others can have that chance to have some fresh blood there. And then toward the end of the 19th century, or 1900s, rather to say, into the 20th century, then you get presidents starting to think about wanting to run. You had Ulysses S. Grant trying to go for a third term. You had Teddy Roosevelt that tried, and then you had Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who did succeed, and he actually was elected for a fourth term, died shortly after being elected for his fourth term. And at that point, the conversation about presidential term limits, became in vogue, and the country kind of felt like, okay, it's time for us to, put that amendment up, and that they did in 1954. And so, and the unfortunate thing is, when term limits were passed, the 22nd Amendment was ratified. President Eisenhower later said, it's really unfortunate that term limits on the presidency were put in place. This is all well and good, but I wish they had done it for Congress.
Yeah,
but there's an inherent problem with that, right? That how you can get Congress to propose its own term limit.
Right. A lot of people say they're never going to vote themselves out of office.
Right. I like to say this. It's kind of like a Kentuckyism here. Asking Congress to vote for their own term limits is asking chickens to vote for Colonel Sanders. It's just not in their own self-interest to do so, right? I mean, there's a conflict of interest that's so plain in an open view to anybody that's going to look at this. That of course they're not. They might give some lip service to that, but it's just not going to happen. Certainly at a 2/3 supermajority level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can't get Congress to agree on anything these days at nearly a 2/3 majority level. All right, we have to squeeze in a quick break. We are more than happy to take more calls afterwards, so let's get those lined up during the commercial break. 615-737-PLUS is the number to call. Should term limits be a thing for our congressmen and women? Let us know what you think right after this. Good evening. Welcome back to Open Line. Our topic tonight, term limits. Should we have them for our lawmakers? Aaron Dukette from the group U.S. Term Limits is joining us tonight. Aaron, thank you again for being with us.
It's good to hear you. All
right, we're welcoming phone calls. As always, 615-737-PLUS is the number to call. Lucy's already called in and gotten us started. I was just taking a look at from our Facebook watchers, how they were responding to this. Every single person who has commented had said, yes, we should have term limits. I wonder what the polling shows.
Yeah, it's very true. If I wear a term limit Congress hat, I'm the most popular guy in the room. I can make friends real quickly that way. But I can tell you, so there was actually a very recent poll that was taken among likely Tennessee voters in December 2020. And they asked voters, would you support a constitutional amendment for term for term limits on Congress, and it was a resounding 78% of Tennessee voters want term limits on Congress, and that's very consonant with what we see in pick a state. I mean, everywhere nationally, it's right around the high 70s, low 80s in the support there. And it very interestingly, just to kind of piggyback on the last caller's discussion with us, it actually cuts across party lines. In Tennessee, the polling, if you break it down by party lines, shows that 77% of Republicans, 90% of Democrats, and 71% of independents all say that they want term limits on Congress. So it's a really kind of a unique issue in that it is really kind of cuts through typical partisan issues, and seems like every issue is partisan now. Well, term limits is kind of this oddball that doesn't fit the mold, and here's how much it doesn't fit the mold. It may be the single issue, term limits on Congress, maybe the single issue that both former presidents Obama and Trump agreed upon. They both favored term limits on Congress.
Wow, that is pretty significant. Okay, so that begs the question, because you covered it doesn't have to be the lawmakers voting themselves out of a job via the Constitution. That's not our only option here. So if so many people are for this, what's the issue? Why isn't this being done?
Sure, and that's my question always, right? So we know, to bring it back to what we mentioned before, the other half of Article 5 provides that states can come together to propose an amendment, but they have to have 2/3 of the states agree upon that topic to discuss and propose on. And so they have to pass legislation as a resolution declaring, the state of Tennessee's legislature hereby joins other states in wanting to come together for the purpose of proposing a single amendment for term limits on Congress. And so what it is, it's really a heavy lift, because if you think about that, the resolution needs to pass not only through Tennessee's legislature, but through Kentucky's legislature and 33 other state legislatures for this to happen. So that's a heavy lift. It has to go through subcommittees and committees and floor votes, right? And then the other chambers. So there's a real heavy lift here, but the good news is, that's a good thing, right? The framers were very, very wise that they didn't want the ability to propose amendments to be too easy. That would be a dangerous thing for the Constitution if amendments were too easily proposed. So that's why there's the high bar. That's why there's the high bar having a 2/3 supermajority in both chambers of Congress to propose, and the high bar for the states, arguably higher bar to get this done. And so it's a heavy lift, but with the will of the people behind it and grassroots getting activated and letting their legislatures know that they want to see this happen, it will happen. And we're seeing that this year in particular. We're really taking off. We have 4 states that have passed this resolution, and the most recent being West Virginia, that just passed this overwhelmingly with a bipartisan vote last month, became state number 4 to pass this resolution. So we have 30 more states to go. We're hoping for Tennessee to be number 5. U.S. term limits, we passed this resolution through a single chamber of 3 different state legislatures so far. We also have a lot of action going on in Arizona as well. So it's well on the move, and we're looking for the support of the people to get it done.
These don't all have to pass in the same year, do they?
Depends on the legislative rules. So in Tennessee, it's a single legislative session is stretched out over 2 years. So, we can pass one chamber in 1 year, but still be alive and passed in the second subsequent year of that session. Other states have it such that the whole session is considered 1 year.
Okay, but I guess I'm saying you don't need the 34 states within a year's time span.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you do not. So once state legislatures pass that resolution, it's sort of indefinite, it's sort of tabled. They actually send it to Congress as notice. We're going to do this. And so when Congress has collected 2/3 of the states applying for this, then they are constitutionally compelled to move.
Gotcha.
And we have to make this happen. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate, which seems a pretty lonely position on this issue considering the polling. But some will say that if you have term limits, you lose experience.
Sure. And while that might be true, I guess my question then becomes, what kind of experience are we talking about? In Congress, it's sometimes formulated as institutional knowledge, and so we need experienced people. But if you think about someone that you voted for that's run for their first term, are they running because you need to send me there for 20 years before I figure it out and I can be effective? No, you expect them to be effective right off the bat. And that's the same case as, in the work world too. I mean, yes, there's a learning curve for learning something, but you need to be able to adjust to it pretty quickly and be competent. That's very possible to do. If you think about the knowledge that's necessary to be a legislator in Congress, often politicians will sort of articulate this, that we need that experience there to hold the fort, and keep a professional presence. But the legislature was never meant to be a professional legislature. It should be a citizen legislature where you go and do service and come back to the people you serve, and serve under the laws, or live under the laws that you created.
There's also the argument that with term limits, the law of the land, lobbyists would be in charge and have their way more often.
Right. And so I would just kind of put it this way. If that were the case, then lobbyists, being lobbyists, would have lobbied for term limits to happen by now. And they don't. Yeah. Actually, there's been a study and a survey done among DC lobbyists, and they uniformly oppose term limits. In fact, Jack Abramoff, everyone remembers him. He very famously was one of the most corrupt lobbyists in history. He served jail time, and he actually put out a book, after he was out of jail, about his experience. And what he said was, the last thing that I ever wanted was to have term limits, because what that would do is basically, periodically rip out a big chunk of my Rolodex. And I have to start over these whole relationships that I've been building. It's much easier for me as a high-powered lobbyist to invest in my relationships, schmooze and cozy up with the right people, have those relationships that I can rely upon for 20, 30, even 40 years, than it is if someone's going to have to be out of there after 10 years. Well, I have to start all over now. And I actually maybe have to do my job as a lobbyist and actually argue the points of what is, a good legislation or not. And so actually lobbyists, don't want term limits because it actually undermines their power. They rely upon a Congress that cozies up to them and kind of takes their perks.
Makes a lot of sense. Let's get to the phones. We have Taylor on the line. Hi, Taylor. Thanks for calling in tonight to Open Line. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are this. This sounds like such a good idea, but I actually think it's a terrible idea, and I'll tell you why.
Please do.
I'll give my example using Metro Nashville's City Council. I never worked harder on anything than I did getting that put into place, our own term limits here, but it has turned into a disaster. What happens is you have the option of getting rid of some of the best and trying to get rid of one or two that you think have been terrible over the years, but you're getting rid of dozens of very competent ones. And I can see why Obama and President Bush, one, thought it was a good idea for term limits, because you are really giving the executive branch what they need as more power and authority, because you've got all these freshmen. Some are dedicated to the job, some are not, and couple of terms, the only thing they know about the government is where the restrooms are and what kind of pay they're going to get. There's no penalty for skipping meetings, and so I think the best thing we've got going is what we currently have. You can get rid of a bum. Now, if the state of California has a crazy person as one of their congressmen, so be it. That doesn't mean we have to turn over the entire Congress every 4 years or 2 years with new, unprepared people trying to handle a job that is too big for most of them. So there are many other points, but
Sure.
that's the main one, because I think it was a disaster at council, and I think it'd be the worst in the U.S. Congress. So
Thank you,
that's
Taylor.
my thoughts.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Have a good night. Aaron, I'm going to let you respond to that.
Yeah, I appreciate the concern, the objection, and I guess what I would start to say about that is, well, a few things. So. Just the idea that with term limits, you'd have a lot of people that are really kind of wet behind the ears and are not competent enough to run the show correctly. I'll just pull out the example. Actually, in Florida, the Speaker of the House there in the state of Florida, in the state legislature, is actually limited to 2 years. And after that, the Speaker needs to rotate. And actually, they lead the country in fiscal solvency. And so they have actually kind of shown that actually term limits can actually be very effective. Now, in Congress, is it likely that you would have, or one and done or two and done kind of term limit? Probably not. It's probably longer than that. But say there was a term limit that was passed and proposed and then ratified and said, as a member of the House of Representatives, you can't serve more than 4 terms or 5 terms, so 8-10 years. I would just kind of put it this way: if you can't get the job done competently in 8-10 years, why do we need you there for 20-30? And we have a number of individuals, and they tend to head the chairmanships of committees because of their longevity. Without term limits, you have a seniority-based system where the longer you're there and the more funding that you bring in, the fundraising that you do, then that's how you get your chairmanships. It's not necessarily about you bring brilliant ideas to the table and you battle it out and then you're elected for that or appointed for that reason. And so I also think there's another dimension to what the gentleman had brought up. At the local level or state level, there's a bit of a difference in quality of term limits or the severity of the need for term limits. Now, U.S. term limits supports term limits all the way down to the town dog catcher. So we're all about it, right? But there is a qualitative difference. In the local level or at the state level, the term limits are the need is not as pronounced as it is in Congress. We have pretty consistently about 11% approval rating of Congress from year to year to year as a whole, right? So everyone kind of thumbs down when they talk about Congress. But the re-election rate last time was 96%, and it's consistently 94, 95, 96% the re-election rate. Now, I would just put the question are we going to just simply blame the voters that they are re-electing a Congress that they thoroughly can't stand according to their polling? Well, I don't entirely say that. I think what we have is a systemic issue with the fact that the incumbency advantage is just too strong. It's just too powerful. And the rules, the winners are those who make the rules win, right? So in Congress, they can kind of structure the rules to their advantage as well. Did you know that the 50% of incumbents that run for re-election spend more using the franking privilege, so using taxpayer dime, than their challengers spend in their entire campaign trying to challenge them? So the franking privilege, just to kind of give a little background to that, it's simply if you ever get something in the mail or an email, you get reached out to you by your legislators in Congress. Here's what I've been doing. Here's the great things I've been working on in Congress. Ain't I great? Well, it's not. Is it campaigning? Yeah, I would say it is, right? But those in Congress, they get to kind of structure the rules as to what's considered campaigning. So there's an inherent disadvantage to being a challenger, and it sort of lops on top of itself. The longer that they're there, the more entrenched that they are, the more that they have this advantage. Corporate super PACs, they give over $9 out of every $10 to challengers. I'm sorry, $9 out of every $10 to incumbents over challengers. Wow. So it's not even a party issue. They give to who's there. Why? Because the devil you know is better than the one you don't know, right? They want to invest in the person they've already been working with for 6-8 years, so they're going to keep them there. And the longer they're there, the more entrenched they are, the more their war chest is huge. And you just cannot, it is very difficult to surmount that. So out of fairness for elections, we need to have this happen.
Yeah, to pull back that curtain is so very interesting. We have to take another commercial break. I would love to get more callers after this. 615-737-PLUS. Stay with us. Welcome back to Open Line. We are talking about term limits for our lawmakers tonight and what it will take to get them. I have a great guest with me tonight, Aaron Dukette, who is the state director for Tennessee for U.S. term limits. Aaron, again, thank you for being with us. We have another half hour to go. We would invite any phone calls. Let us know what you think about term limits. The number is on the screen, 615-737-PLUS. Aaron, y'all have a great website. It's termlimits.com. I was checking it out before the show here, and I was looking at the different questions that people usually ask about this and the different arguments people make. And one thing that really jumped out to me was a pro of term limits is it really balances the power among the states. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And so what we say to that is this. I guess one great advantage of that Supreme Court ruling in 95 is that, okay, so term limits have to come by constitutional amendment, and that means this law is going to apply across the board regardless of the state. Well, if you have term limits in place, right now we have several states, right, that have very long termers. They've been there 30 plus years, that hold a lot of sway and have a stranglehold and a monopoly on power there. And so other states really can't compete with that. And so if you have term limits, you're going to level the playing field there, because even if there's a majority leader or a committee chairman in a different state that is doing all kinds of things that might be deleterious to the country, at the end of the day, they're going to be gone after so much time, just as any other legislator is. And so it guarantees that at some point they're going to be gone. And what that really means is that you're going to have an open seat election. And to me, it's almost the result of term limits being open seat elections is almost synonymous with what this issue is about. We wanted an amendment for open seat elections, because when you have an open seat election, what do you have? You don't have that incumbent that's been there forever with all that war chest, with all that money, being able to really kind of bullyrag a challenger around. Ballotpedia did a study and analysis. They now think that you need at least $2.5 million just to equal name recognition with an incumbent, right? I mean, who's got that hanging around, right? So what intelligent teacher or police officer has that kind of money? They don't. And so many good people don't run. Well, if you have term limits, it's going to apply across the board. Everybody's going to have to leave at some point, just like with the presidency. And so what that means is you have more competition, just like when the presidential elections every 4 years. If it's not an incumbent, or if a president has served 2 terms already, they are constitutionally mandated to leave after that second term. Okay, so that what happens is that you have 2 primary elections in both of the major parties, and you get third parties involved, and you get much more competition for that seat. And so I say, when there's more competition for a seat, both at the primary level and the general election level, that benefits voters. Voters benefit from a breadth of choices. Very often we feel like you get into the ballot box, you're like, I don't really have a choice, right? I am stuck holding my nose and voting for the lesser of 2 evils again and again and again. Or at a protest, I just don't vote, right?
Right.
And so what that guarantees is an open seat election.
Let's get to the lines real quick. We have Rob on the line. Good evening, Rob. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If you want a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, you need term limits on all public offices. Every one of them ought to have term limits on them, so that more people could be part of their government. Also, the government ought to be taught in the school system, where the children, when they come out of school, they have a sense of how government operates and how the different offices operate in government. But until we get our country back in the hands of the people and take it out of these leaders that crave power, once they stay in office for a few years, all they're doing is craving power and benefiting themselves. You can look at the benefits they give themselves that they should not be allowed to be done. That should be voted on by the people also. And that's my understanding of how government is getting more and more powerful, and people are losing less and less power of their government officials.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. I think you bring up a point a lot of people have. We appreciate hearing from you tonight. You have a good night, Rob. Aaron, I want to ask you about this. Our country is more divided than ever, and it has been now for a couple of years. We've been marching in this direction. Does that also mean that we are marching in a stronger direction in pushing the term limits? Are you seeing this gain speed?
Yeah, it's kind of the interesting thing about term limits I've mentioned before. You know, it's a uniquely nonpartisan issue, or I like to call it it's a nonpartisan solution to a bipartisan problem.
Yeah.
The problems in D.C. are both parties, right? And they work together more than we think. And they like to kind of pit us against each other, really. I mean, they make it about the people and about this team versus that team. But really, it's an issue. I'm sorry, repeat your question again.
Well, do you feel like that even as we get more divided, that this push is gaining more momentum?
Sure. Yeah, we have seen that, especially in the last year.
Yeah.
I think the COVID-19 pandemic and the presidential election and all the sort of just political circus that's happened in the last year or so has really kind of stoked the fires. And it's a unique thing where we can come in with term limits as a uniquely bipartisan solution. And actually come together with people that we maybe ordinarily would not see eye to eye on in political issues for the greater good of the country. Because we see that the problem in Congress is not necessarily Democrats or Republicans, but it is beyond that. It's really about the incumbency monopoly. that we see in Congress, that they are holding on to their positions for far too long. And the longer that they're there, the less responsive. They live 1,000, 2,000, miles away from their constituencies. They rarely go home. They don't spend much time there. And so they're not hearing from their people. And so they become more and more disconnected the longer that they're there from the voices that they're there to speak for.
So what can people do who do want to see term limits that will make a difference? A lot of people, you say, write your legislator, and they think, well, that's just going to some email, some aides looking at it and tossing it in the trash.
Yeah. and then that's right. If you send kind of a form email, very often it sort of just, glazes over, right? Well, that's a good start, right? I think you can call your legislator. You can even show up. I know the Tennessee legislature is open. We have our active legislation there. It's House Joint Resolution 8. Representative Chris Todd filed it, and it actually passed through the House this year and is heading over to the Senate. And so, polling your state legislator's ear is a good thing. Those state legislators, they live in your districts, and they're in a part-time legislature. They're not 1,000 miles away. They will be responsive to you. They hear you. And so you can make noise and let them know. I mean, you can go to a local meeting or something and actually talk to them directly to let them know. But also, at our website, we're always recruiting our grassroots volunteers at termlimits.com. And then you click on the volunteer link, and people can actually get involved and actually work with myself and others to get this done. So,
what do you think the chances are in the Tennessee Senate?
Extraordinarily strong.
Oh, wow.
We came in, we do U.S. term limits started a few years ago, started a pledge program with candidates and incumbent legislators in the states to ask them to sign a pledge to vote for and co-sponsor this resolution that would enable this to happen using the Article 5 process. And we came into it, we did a lot of work. There's a team at U.S. term limits, talked to a lot, before the elections last year to get pledges in. We ended up with close to 30 seated legislators that had signed our pledge right off the bat. So it gives us a real foothold. And actually what we do with our volunteers now is try to get those pledges. And so it gave us a real foothold. There's a lot of sentiment. We did pass on a bipartisan vote. And so it's moving.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Okay, we got another call on the line. Tom is on. I was trying to get to you as quickly as you call in. Tom, good evening. Go ahead.
How you doing? I'm for term limits, but here's my thing.
Okay.
What do we need political parties for? Think about that. I know people, it doesn't matter. They're going to vote straight down the line for their party, and they're ignorant. They don't even know what they're voting for. I don't like political parties. I'll stand by and listen for your reply.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. We appreciate hearing from you tonight. Maybe a little out of your wheelhouse, but Aaron, have you heard that one before?
No, heck no. Yeah, that's totally in my wheelhouse.
Good.
To bring back Washington, right? His grand example. The party that he belonged to was none. Right?
Yeah.
He was a nonpartisan president. And there's something I can, I grew up in New Hampshire, so I really sympathize with that sort of independent spirit. Just tell me who you are and what you're about, and I will reason about it and make my vote, right? And I think there's a real problem with that, right? That everything is so hyper partisan. So I can tell you this: with term limits, if you put term limits in place, it's not going to solve all of the ills in Congress or all the ills in the country. However, it's going to be a major piece, and here's why. If you have those open seat elections, that means there's more competition for those seats. And that means that the parties actually kind of have to battle with themselves to produce who their candidate is going to be. There might be, one candidate who party leadership, really wants to push as the next one to get that seat. But there's room, for disagreement, and that's why we have primaries. And so having term limits opens that up. If there's really a correlation between longevity in Congress, if you're there for decades, and actually being entrenched more in partisan politics and partisan bickering, because you don't have that motivation to be accountable to the voters and actually have to reach across the aisle. It's the younger members of Congress, and I don't mean in terms of age necessarily, but I mean in terms of being newer to Congress, that actually reach across the aisle and come up with innovative solutions. It's not the ones that have been there 30, 40 years. It's just not.
That's interesting. I did notice, I read on your website that as of, I guess, early in 2020, 15 states have term limits on their state lawmakers. Is there anything to be garnered from that? And Kentucky and Tennessee are not among them.
They're not, and so that is the fruit of the efforts back in the 90s that we talked about, that primarily through ballot initiatives, but actually some of the state legislatures passed term limits on themselves, believe it or not. And so that's a carryover largely from the 90s there. A more recent one is Louisiana. Louisiana's state legislature just had their term limits kick in last election cycle in 2019. And so that's a holdover from that. And some of those states have seen good things come out of that. There's not necessarily a direct correlation that can be drawn, but there's something to be noted by the fact that 4 of the top 5 most fiscally solvent state legislatures are term limited. Leading with Florida, and so there's some benefit there. Now, U.S. term limits doesn't actively go and try to push for new term limits on the state legislatures right now, because we're focused on the big fish, and that is thoroughly Congress with that 96% reelection rate and 11% approval rating.
Most certainly.
And we need those state legislatures to get it done.
Yeah. Let's get back to the phone lines. Ernie is on the line. Hi, Ernie. Go ahead.
Hi. Well, I was going to give an answer to why do we have parties.
Yes, sir.
It's a conduit for money is all that is. For instance, in small towns or even big towns, the people they don't run on the party line because it doesn't take that much money. You go to the county level, maybe a little more, but still, it's only when you start getting into the higher offices do they have to run as a member of some party to get funding.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
It would seem so, Ernie. I think you got the nail on the head. Thank you for calling in.
Yeah. Well, where am I wrong?
I don't have anything to argue with you. Aaron, do you?
You're 100% correct, sir. I wanted to mention earlier, and this is a good time to mention that you're right. I mean, the parties really function as funding, and maybe it's arguable that the parties serve a function in order to organizing people around certain general principles that they agree upon, and so. Yeah, you're absolutely correct about the influence of money there, and it's so pronounced. And remember that the super PACs give over 9 out of every $10 to those incumbents over the challengers. It's not a party giving. That's a how long you've been in Congress sort of giving principle. In 2016, another Ballotpedia study, they analyzed the 2016 elections in the House of Representatives, and they found by their metrics that only 23 out of the 435 elections were competitive.
Wow.
In other words, there are a ton of elections that were really, you had someone that didn't have their name recognition, they just didn't know who it was, and so you start saying, well, who's that? And a lot of people just end up taking for the person that they know.
All right, we got to go to another commercial break. We're back after this. We are talking about term limits and whether or not they're the right call for our U.S. lawmakers tonight. And Aaron Dukette has been a wealth of knowledge on the issue. He is the Tennessee State Director for U.S. Term Limits. Aaron, I know we talked about this at the top of the hour, but I want to hit it again because I know the biggest argument that you hear people say, but Congress is never going to vote themselves out. It doesn't have to go that route in order to happen. Can you please explain this again?
Yes, for the same reason that children will never set their own bedtime, Congress is not going to produce its own term limits. You're absolutely right. And so everyone needs to hear, yes, we know Congress is never going to propose its own term limits, except maybe. And this is why. Like we talked about in the beginning, Article 5 in the U.S. Constitution allows that either the states or Congress can propose amendments. And the way that the states do it is that when 2/3 of the state legislatures pass a resolution declaring we want to meet to propose an amendment on this topic, then they can get together for that topic to propose that amendment. And that's all 50 states can come together, have a seat at the table. The brain trust of the country can come together to produce a proposal. Whatever is proposed for that amendment then has to go back to the state legislatures to be ratified for it to become law. And so the brilliance of this option, and it's so wonderful, the second to last day of the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention, they were looking over the Constitution, and they found that we need to put this other method that we had originally back into place to be able to give the states a way to bypass Congress, go around Congress, to propose an amendment that they would be reticent to do, or they'd be unwilling to propose. And an obvious example of that is congressional term limits for the very obvious reasons.
And a couple of states have done it so far.
Yes, Florida, Alabama, Missouri, and most recently West Virginia have passed this resolution. It is also active in the state of Tennessee in Nashville. The resolution is House Joint Resolution 8. It was filed by Representative Chris Todd and has a bunch of co-sponsors. It passed the House this session on a bipartisan vote, and it is headed over to the Senate. And so if the Senate passes this resolution, concurs, then Tennessee would be state number 5 to pass this.
And that means if people are watching tonight and they support this, they need to do some work.
Absolutely. Go to termlimits.com and you can find out all you need to know about getting involved. And we'll be in touch with you personally to activate you. We need help on all kinds of fronts.
Yeah, I checked out the website. It is a great source of information and a look at the issue from all sides of it. There's even a podcast, I noticed. I'm a huge podcast fan.
Yeah, it's called No Uncertain Terms. So there's a little pun there, and it comes out every Monday and it's pretty entertaining. Our executive director Nick Tumbelides is the co-host. He's a pretty witty and funny guy, so it's really kind of a lighthearted thing. But we really kind of go to task on these term limits issues, keep you apprised on the movement and how things are progressing in the states, and just give you some background on the whole thing. So it's really, really exciting.
I like that. All right, the website again is termlimits.com. Aaron, thank you for lending some time to us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
You bet. All right, when we come back, we'll tell you what's on tap for the rest of the week. Stay with us. here on Open Line. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to talk about the best movies of the year and their chances at the upcoming Academy Awards to win that Oscar. On Wednesday, the president from the LGBT Chamber of Commerce will be here to talk about the so-called slate of hate moving through our state legislature. And then on Thursday, it's the ever-popular Ask the Attorney with Kevin Kennedy. So I hope you'll join us each night at 7. Coming up in a bit, I'll see you for News Channel 5 at 10. Have a good night.